Early Breakfast with Rosie Wright on Times Radio with Personio. Streamline your HR processes with the holistic HR software that grows with your workforce. Personio, everything starts with people.
I mean, really, there is one story on the front page of all the papers. You know what that is. The Daily Mail say, Minister's TV blunder that says it all about the Tory chaos. And they've got a picture of Gillian Keegan coming out of her car as she was then forced to have to apologise for her choice language yesterday. The Telegraph says the concrete crisis and hot mic rant leave Keegan fighting for survival. And the Times says the Tories have put a sticking plaster on risky concrete. Let's talk through these stories in a bit more detail. Andrew Eborn, barrister, broadcaster and the president of Octopus TV, joins me on the programme. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. Can I say what an effing good job you're doing? It's always a thrill. Extraordinary, isn't it? I'll tell you what, we always say that history repeats itself because people don't learn the lessons from history. People seem to forget they've got a microphone on. You remember good old Gordon Brown in the 2010 campaign talking about the ridiculous, bigoted woman.
But he was in a taxi, wasn't he then? He wasn't stood right in front of a TV reporter and a camera fully lit by the lights whilst wearing a microphone.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well, you might remember John Major. He reported to his colleagues, and he was in the studio then. Basically, in 1993, he admitted that he didn't understand why people kept voting for him, and he was talking about the Eurosceptics and so on and so forth. I mean, history is littered with such examples where politicians don't seem to remember that they are mic'd up. I mean, you even had good old now King Charles. You might remember him talking on the slopes. When he talked about a long-time BBC royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, says, people, I can't bear that man, he's so awful. We're going to have lots and lots of this, aren't we?
But Andrew, what's at the heart of this? Because, yes, this is a kind of media training, huge mistake, but actually it's given us some insight into what she actually thinks. And from what she said, do you have a problem with it?
Well, I think you're absolutely right to highlight and say that you're doing a good job. It's extraordinary. I mean, this is all to do with the concrete bungle, as I call it. And it's all to do with the country going to rack and ruin, the reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete, which looks like an aero bar. And the whole point is this. It was used in schools and colleges and other buildings from the 1950s to the mid-1990s. Everybody knew at that stage it had a usable lifespan of about 30 years. And we've been warned about this. I mean, there was a primary school, I think, in Kent, which collapsed in 2018. And successive governments, I mean, I say it's been there since the 50s and 90s, all the way through to the 90s. And we've had both Tory and Labour governments who've known about this. So we need to do this. We need to get to the bottom as to why this issue has not been solved. And it's not just to do with schools. You're going to have courthouses and other buildings. You've also got other issues such as they're talking about asbestos and so on and so forth. There are big issues in the building industry which need to be resolved. And somebody needs to get on top of it. The whole thing about blaming everybody else is not really helpful. We need to sort of turn around and say, look, there are these real issues, and this is how we're going to deal with it.
But do you think she's doing a good job, the Education Secretary?
I think she's doing a phenomenal job, Rosie. I'm with you on this. I think anybody, the sort of media training, it doesn't look good. Firstly, to be sweary on anything, and people try to work out jokes, and politicians with jokes tend to fall flat. I remember Ronald Reagan had that sort of throwaway joke at the height of the Cold War, and he did his radio address in August 1984, and he sort of said, "My fellow Americans, I'm pleased to tell you today, I signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever. We begin bombing in 5 minutes." Which was supposed to be a sort of sound check joke, but badly backfired in diplomatic relations. Politicians and making jokes with journalists is not a good look. It's your basic media training, as we've spoken about earlier.
It was a bit of a misfire.
I think that's
to say the least. And it looked, well, Zoe's analysis that we just heard there was that she's not going to be fired nor sacked. And I have to say, it is only really the Telegraph that are going with that line this morning. Let's look at the other story we would have been talking about, which would have been Keir Starmer reshuffling his top team. I was amused to see the cartoon inside the Times this morning is I'm promoting you to the shadow cabinet, so says Keir Starmer. What's your name?
Yeah, well, exactly. I love it. And this is his sort of 3-point pledge, isn't he? He was going to change the Labour Party. He was going to highlight the failings of the Tories, but also he was going to offer a good alternative and this is what he's trying to do, trying to get all these sort of new names in the mix. And what will happen is that you're right. I think that the Times has done it brilliantly in that cartoon. Who are these people? And I can tell you that over the next few weeks and months, we're going to see more and more of the characters who we don't really know at the moment. And I think that's an interesting approach. I mean, it's as they're putting all these policies, a lot of them which seem to be sort of Tory policies, in the same sort of Blairite way that he's sort of following this through. We're going to see more and more of these characters coming to the fore. But it's an interesting mix, from Liz Kendall, Hilary Benn. You've got Shabana Mahmood as well, who she's a barrister. I've always got a lot of time for barristers, being a fellow one, and she's going to take over the justice brief. But right and centre of that is obviously Rayna, who's now got a proper job in addition to being that sort of deputy leader. And it's going to be interesting seeing that sort of the double act, them developing.
Talking of former Prime Ministers, we're going to be looking at Liz Truss's very short tenure in about half an hour's time. But the portrait of Theresa May has been released. It's going to be displayed in Portcullis House. And I know it's really difficult talking about paintings on the radio, but it's a green backdrop. She's wearing a blue suit jacket with then another huge, what looks like coat on top of it. So she looks very broad and quite stern. And the headline in the Mail is, "They've made Theresa look even more of a Glumbucket."
Oh, it's a wonderful picture, and I think you're right. It looks a bit like Napoleon, if you ask me. I mean, it is a little
bit like that, yeah.
It's good. What do you want? Famously, the Mail's Quentin Letts, he asked Mrs May during the 2017 general election whether she felt she was coming across as a bit of a Glumbucket. Well, I can tell you this new portrait certainly does that. The artist concerned wanted £28,000 to do this psychological characterisation. And she's actually holding, you'll see one thing she's holding is Lily of the Valley, which is one of the Queen's favourite flowers, a symbol of purity, joy, love, sincerity, happiness and luck. Well, none of that is shown in this picture of Theresa May. And it'd be interesting to see what she thought of it, because I can't imagine it's not a particularly flattering picture of her. And I think there's a fun side to Theresa which could have been encapsulated in the same way as a sort of... I quite like
What's
to see
the fun side? Walking onto Dancing Queen?
Well, I was just thinking, put her in the glorious ABBA outfit, have her running around fields of corn as a naughty bit. I like Theresa May. Actually, she can be rather fun, but this picture certainly, in the Napoleonic way, does look definitely a lot more Glumbucket.
Matt Chorley had said on Twitter, it looks like the latest announcement of the next Doctor Who, which I think actually was quite astute. Front page of the Times, this weight loss drug, Wegovy, much heralded, talked about. It's turning up with no prescription so that, the general public can get their hands on it. Only they can't because supplies are running short. There are concerns, though, Andrew, that, it isn't right for the general public to be able to pay, £200 a month to get it privately. That's not what it's designed for.
No, absolutely not. And this is it's now 50,000 of these patients are eligible for this NHS pilot scheme. I've known about this drug and spoken to a number of doctors about this for some time. And privately, people have been using it, and people in the public eyes, such as Boris and Jeremy Clarkson, have said, look, this is this miracle drug. But like a lot of these things, all it is an appetite suppressor. And as soon as you come off it, well, your appetite returns and you put the weight back on again. But like most drugs and things, there are side effects. And I think people need to be very, very careful as to what they do, just rushing down to your pharmacy and forking out your £200 a month just to look a bit skinnier for a while. And a lot of it's very simple. Dieting is very simple. It's all about output and input, isn't it? If you exercise more and eat more healthily... We know that, Andrew, but we don't do it as society, do we? You're right. We don't do it as a society. So people look for these shortcuts. And I can tell you what my doctor friends are telling me is that at the moment it's an injection. As soon as you start doing the pill version, it will be even easier for people. But you have to make sure that there are these stricter checks, including a full clinical assessment and health check, and make sure, look for the warning signs. So the advice to everybody about Wegovy and various other Ozempic, which sounds as something from the Cheeky Girls, doesn't it? You sort of need to turn around that you make sure that you're getting proper advice regarding this and what the long-term effects will be, because losing a bit of weight very quickly is one thing, and people who lose about 15% on average of their weight is great, but the long-term side is interesting. High blood pressure, heart disease, it's got advantages for that. My advice would be talk to your doctors about whether it's really right for you.
Yeah. Final thing, Andrew, front page of the Times. For animal magnetism, opposites don't attract. We are led to believe that they do, but this latest research is suggesting perhaps not.
It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? 80% of traits that were examined, including political leanings, how much people weighed at birth, and even the age at which they lost their virginity. Extraordinary questions. Basically, they said they're more likely to be attracted to people of a similar. Birds of a feather like to flock together, is what they're saying. And they surveyed about 80,000 British couples to have a look at this sort of side. And that's what they've sort of come up with. And it is interesting, this sort of dating age. We talk about AI is helping people find people of similar interests who they might be able to basically have long-term relationships with. But this is what they're sort of saying, is that you can turn around and if you're a morning lark or a night owl, as well as a tendency to worry about or having hearing difficulties, they basically say that those sort of characteristics was a tendency for opposites to attract, but very small. And it's published, if you want to read more about it, it's in the Nature Human Behaviour, the journal of that. I know you read it every week.
Andrew, thank you so much. Andrew Eborn, we're reunited on the papers, a barrister, broadcaster and president of Octopus TV. Andrew, thank you.
Pleasure.
I'm looking at a little bit more. There were the positive results for whether both couples wore glasses, their father's age, their hair colour, whether their mothers were still alive, how often they drank, how many brothers and sisters they had, and whether they ever felt irritable for a couple of days in a row. So it turns out the more similar you are on those traits, hair colour. Why would hair colour have anything to do with your compatibility with your partner? They help us bond. Lots to come here on Early Breakfast. We'll be looking at the repercussions from the government's handling of the concrete crisis. But right now, it's 5:30.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.